Welcome all to the first lecture in the coming Renaissance series, The Rebirth of the Tragic. Welcome again on this evening of mankind, where we as yet not know when or whence another dawn or day may break. We stand, it seems, at an unprecedented crossroads, where all of a sudden everything seems to matter again. But through the veil of horror, meaning begins to shine. I invite you to join me every Sunday from now on to stride through other possibilities of being, to wrest free new ways of being from the ether. And I wanted to thank all of you who are here, who are present, who are sharing my videos and subscribing to the channel, but also to my Patreons who help me keep the lights on. And if this is a time where you would like to focus on philosophy and self-cultivation, then I would be glad to serve as your private tutor. Reach out to me if you'd like to do so. This is the time to read the great classics, to read Sophocles, for example, and gain a sense again for what it means to be human. Past shall be the day of the last man who flattens the earth and fantasizes about the end of history and a blissful sublation of all suffering by subjugating nature to man's will. This be the day of a new tragic human, a rebirth of the tragic, which may spark a rebirth of the human spirit, granted a new what for. This can only be born from out of a return to the tragic first, into that which the Greeks, when they still had force, called the Deinon, the terrible, Todenos. We are to become again active talents, not reactive worker drones or consumers waiting for some fancied utopia of a perfected and framed, streamlined existence without suffering and pain, without death and loss. All boredom amused, we were promised. Hence, here we must also be extremely careful. For that which Heidegger calls Gestell, the artificial, technological and framing of earth and human, wants us trapped in pods, used as flow heaters for the continuous flow and energizing of credit for consumption, drowning and losing any sense for history and innering of thought and wisdom. It is in framing, sheer techniques, which wants us to exist on the barest level, pilled up, drugged up, with no sense for ourselves left, no grasp of the tragic. Nietzsche, in his unpublished notebooks, speaks of an uncanny wheelwork, of a, quote, total economic management of the earth, which is inevitably in store for us as the history of the coming centuries, end of quote. The war that in framing, Gestell, this uncanny wheelwork wages against humans is a subtle one, a war we do not see. Gestell numbs the eternal conflict between inner human willing and the opposition of the world. Gestell keeps us trapped in the emergency of distresslessness. Heidegger says in his contributions to philosophy that Erschrecken, shock, is the fundamental attunement of the other beginning of history. Perhaps this now is the shock to set forth this other beginning. Time, as Hölderlin saw, is that which tears open other horizons. And if this doesn't shock us, then nothing will. Hence, none of the coming lectures shall be an exercise in some cheap optimism. None of what is being said here promises a utopia or a return to what has been. None of this is to say that we can just carry on as usual after this. This is the death blow to the myth of progress, that we are just marching ever more gloriously to ever greater freedom. Optimism will reveal itself as what it is, the weakest response to what is lurking in history. Nor should any of this be considered pessimism, and that would be the succumbing to the situation, terrified by it. The sentiment, rather, the ontological mood we are about to face on a planetary scale will be insufferable to the greatest optimists. Now going down and under, decline set in. There might be another mood for those capable of facing the storms to come, a tragic serenity. There is presumably nothing more frightful for modern man, the man of action, the center of the universe, when something occurs where the abyss opens up, where all of a sudden the task must not be to make sense, as if sense was something we produce with machinery, but now we are tasked and asked to begin to think, and think slowly and the deepest. Since now it is that Nietzsche's dictum rings through and true. God is dead. No one hears the cries of mortals. And with his Zarathustra, Nietzsche says, INCIPIT TRAGOEDIA. Tragedy begins. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche calls himself the first tragic philosopher. What Aristotle in his Poetics misunderstood, says Nietzsche, about the nature of the truly tragic is that tragedy does not serve as a catharsis, to rid oneself from terror and pity for a moment. Instead, Nietzsche says, and this is what the early Greeks in their tragedies understood, to accept the tragic means to, quote, feel the eternal lust of becoming itself, that lust which also involves the joy of destruction. To this, one must be capable to say yes. If one is to appreciate fully and fundamentally what Nietzsche calls amor fati, the love of what is necessary. Greek tragedy does not simply release one from some psychological or physiological stress. Instead, the primordial war between being and thought, between gods and mortals, is displayed in the irresolvable mystery at the heart of existence. Death itself is the concealed volcanic center of the play, in which we mortals ourselves are at stake. What Aristotle's definition implies is that mortals are the prime actors. What Nietzsche wishes us moderns to see, again, is that the truly tragic is when the Daenon, the terrible, the horrible, sets in, and without any guilt, without any sin, without any support or help or doing of the human being, the Daenon takes its course. Nietzsche is the philosopher who gazes ahead unto what's coming, with the self-sufficient serenity of the halcyon bird. Incipit tragödia. Tragedy begins, says that there is no solution to the problems of modernity. No, tragedy sets in and sets forth this world. Yet the last man is incapable of letting reign the tragic. From the last man's frantic negation and denial of the tragic and the horrible at the heart of history, the crudest nihilism has sprung and is counter-throwing itself back to the human plane, eradicating in its path what Goethe calls Menschensinn, the sense of what it means to be human. In Nietzsche's Gaia Scienza, his fröhliche Wissenschaft, gay science, we find a hint at what Nietzsche means when he calls for a new cast of tragic philosophers. I quote paragraph 268 in the third book. Quote, what makes one heroic? At once, zugleich, at once, going out to meet one's highest suffering and one's highest hope. What is important here is the word zugleich in German. At once or at the same time, we are to go out and meet our highest suffering, the worst horror imaginable, while simultaneously walking towards that which promises elevation. One cannot and will not sublate or cancel out the other. Hope does not overcome suffering. Suffering does not subjugate hope, but in Heraclitean harmony, bursting apart while striving towards each other. In that harmony, there's the tune, the melody of the heroic. The heroic, tragic human being is the one capable of facing both at the same time, the most horrible suffering and the highest hope. Of standing, the tragic human being is capable also of standing and bearing, withholding this fundamental, irresolvable tension, and will still sing a halcyonic tune, will still be able to be joyful, without idealization or transfiguration, and without juvenile despair, of course, either. Just like the little ice bird halcyon, which breeds on the sea during a calm period in winter solstice, mindful of the tempests and the horrors that will inevitably return. Mindful, the little bird is also that by the law of the eternal recurrence, these horrors have already passed. In Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, we find early on in the text a meditation upon the dark depths of the horrors of existence, which he asks his readers in the 19th century and the centuries to come to be able to bear. King Midas hunts and tries to capture the demon Silon, a fellow of Dionysus. When Midas, the king, has finally caught the demon, and I quote from Nietzsche, "The demon at first remained silent, motionless and inflexible, until, compelled by the king, he finally broke out into shrill laughter and said," quote, "Suffering creature," this is the demon speaking, "born for a day, child of accident and toil, why are you forcing me to say what is the most unpleasant thing for you mortal being to hear? The very best thing for you is totally unreachable, not to have been born, not to exist, to be nothing. The second best thing for you, however, is this, to die soon." The Greek knew, Nietzsche continues, and felt the terror and horror of existence. In order to live at all, the Greek man must have placed in front of him the gleaming Olympians born in his dreams. As I have said elsewhere, we have no gods to pray to, only a photograph of a black hole and our false idols of ourselves. Hence the need to allow tragedy to set in again in order to free us from the dictatorship of petty nonsense and idolatry unculture. We turn mask wearers, and not the Dionysian Apollinian kind, into our heroes, although they could not be further from the heroic and the truly tragic. Can a modern ear, and is not modern man rather close to King Midas, who wanted to be able to turn everything into gold, and hence turns everything into ashes, destroys even his daughter's life? Now can a modern ear bear the provocation of the demon, that it would be best not to exist, to be nothing? Or if that's not possible, to die soon? It is in bearing this thought, not in succumbing to it, nor in calling something absurd as the early existentialists would have done. It is in bearing it that one begins to this heaviest weight, and not the unbearable lightness of being, right? That one begins to walk at once towards the higher hope, at once together with walking towards the most horrible suffering. The origin of Greek tragedy for Nietzsche, and he follows Schiller here, lies in the chorus of satyrs, which at once, that chorus, that choir, is a bulwark against the world and its horrors, while also allowing for these very horrors to take center stage. That Greek tragedy originates with the choir indicates that it is from an ontological melody, out of the abyss of being, that tragedy sings its tunes. Here there is consolation, but not catharsis. Nietzsche says, but only because, again, there is a sheer abyss and hope at once. And I quote from Nietzsche again from The Birth of Tragedy: The metaphysical consolation, which, as I have already indicated, true tragedy leaves us that at the bottom of everything, in spite of all the transformations and phenomena, life is indestructibly pure and delightful. This consolation appears in lively clarity as the chorus of satyrs. With this choir, the profound Greek, capable of the most delicate and the most severe suffering, consoled himself. The man who looked around with a daring gaze in the middle of the terrifying destructive instinct of so-called world history, and equally into the cruelty of nature. Hence, Hamlet is a tragedy. Without human interference, the tragedy takes its course. Hamlet does not act, for he has seen the horror at the heart of things. This is pure Dionysian spirit. What we require with Nietzsche is hence both the Dionysian and the Apollinian, hence a certain capacity for lying also, for masquerade, but not in order to find catharsis. Rather, the chorus from which tragedy is born, as it sings from out of the abyss of the horror of existence, elevates the human being above mere disgust with the absurd. And life affirmation becomes possible. At the heart of the heroic human being and the tragic philosopher, there is an acceptance of what Nietzsche calls die ewige Wiederkehr des Gleichen, the eternal recurrence of the like. To be a tragic thinker thus means to allow for that which is to take its course and at once await another dawn, but only wait. Goethe, who thought himself incapable of tragedy, for he was too conciliatory, as he wrote in a letter to his friend Schiller in 1797, Goethe nonetheless was capable of bringing to the fore the tragic element of modern man, wanting too much, willing for all desires to be fulfilled, desires for utter and total control of the earth. Goethe's Dr. Faustus sells his soul to the devil, bringing mayhem and destruction to innocence, only to fulfill his solipsistic quest for omniscience and omnipotence. The tragic here is, however, concealed, or rather even distorted. Faust is not capable of accepting the impossibility to know all and everything, and hence brings upon himself and his world, in order to soothe his will to power, great destruction. Yet the truly heroic tragic is when the human being simply allows for the play to take its course. For the tragic will inevitably occur again and again. And yet, as Hölderlin poetized, quote, where there is danger, there the saving grace springs also. Wo aber die Gefahr ist, wächst das Rettende auch. Let me state this more clearly. Only where there is danger can there be a wellspring for grace or of grace, and that which saves and protects. Where there is grace and that which saves us, there will inevitably also danger. And hence perhaps a sense for the tragic may set in again. Quietly, without haste and grand fanfare. It is also from the truly tragic stance that petty ressentiment, a resentment, and the destructive will to revenge are disarmed, which we've seen so much in the past decade. Still, there remains room for freedom. Precisely in the intensity of the eternal recurrence, another sense of freedom opens up. Again, by at once going out towards one's greatest suffering and one's greatest hope. I quote from Heidegger's Nietzsche, Volume 1. If you allow your existence to drift in timorousness and ignorance, with all the consequences these things have, then they will come again, and they will be that which already was. And if, on the contrary, you shape something supreme out of the next moment, as out of every moment, and if you note well and retain the consequences, then this moment will come again and will have been what already was, What counts is eternity. But this matter will be decided solely in your Augenblicke, blinks of an eye, true moments. And it will be decided from out of that which has been. It will be decided from out of that which you yourself hold beings to be, and which stance you take in the midst of beings. It will be decided on the basis of what you will yourself and what you are able to will of yourself. The stance one might take, given our situation, is the tragic, mortal stance. And it is from taking such a stance that the moment in which we are, the moment in which we truly are, and in which beings properly are and light up and shine as what they are, it is in those moments that we want to, that we will to recur in a different manner, such that no, we are not fooling ourselves to be in total control. Instead, we begin to see again that we are not just some functioning processes in need of optimization. No, we are the choir that hums the melody of the abyss, and hence history moves in her subtle, darkened ways. Thank you all very much with kindness for listening. I will be back next week Sunday with a talk on otium cum dignitate, leisure with dignity, idleness with dignity, true skole, something that we have lost, to perhaps ignite a sense again for what it means to be living in otium cum dignitate, now that we are confined to our homes. And I hope that every one of you has a home. And so again, thanks all very much. Feel free to share this video, to comment, to subscribe, or I would be very happy also if you could support me a bit on Patreon. So I wish you all the best. Thank you. Good night.